I'm there. I work with pre-K, so therefore, and
I work with young toddlers. Not here.
I work with young people. And Samantha, I work with girls.
I'm Molly, I work with 3 girls.
I'm Kate, my students are just math training.
Actually, this is now Margaret, and our kids are young. We have young toddlers and some.
I'm Nicole, I work with 3 days and a half girls.
I'm Leah. So a little fun fact, a few years ago, I was in the same seats where these teachers were. I did also the Boulder School Teacher Training Program. And so I'm excited to be back in this role, teaching and still being connected to your work. So.
And I'm Dane, taught this class for a while. Mary had been on one of our previous panels, which is great. I taught middle school writing in Denver, and I've worked now through CU Denver for about 4 years in various capacities, teaching classes, working with teachers, getting their license, things like that.
So we were thinking we could do the introductions along with the first question. So one, tell us your name, your role, and what your definition of community is, or what community means to you. Sure, you can start, Chanel.
Okay, my name is Chanel Rodriguez. I work for Intercambio United Community. We are a non-profit organization. We offer English as a second language. Our mission is the immigrant in our community. But not only our mission is teaching English to them, it's also to help them to connect to the community. My goal in my community, well, first with my family, I think. With my daughter, for example, I think we live in a very important time in this country now. So I think my goal with her is raise her with good values. I'm sorry about my English, I'm still new here. Okay. So raise her with great values. I like the people that are inclusive. I don't know if I say correct. So this is my first mission, and the rest I think is in general with my community. I am the kind of person that like to change things when I don't like it, when I think it's not fair for the rest. So I think it's part of my mission, my role. So create a better place for all of us, for our children, because it's the future. So yes.
I'm Mary Young. I'm in my 5th year of service on the Boulder City Council. And the definition of community for me is knowing who's around you and having connections to people around you, whether it is where you live, where you work, and just where you walk around, and to have those connections so that there is a network of people that can basically help each other when the time arises that you need each other. So that's the definition of community for me.
That's true, Vanessa. Thank you. I'm Isabel Sanchez, and I also had 5 years in a nonprofit in Denver called the Grow House, and we serve all ages, little kids, big kids, adults, all kinds of humans. My definition of community, which is interesting because I'm in 2 worlds. I live in Boulder. I live in a little trailer park here on Mapleton, and I've been there 8 years. And I'm the president there of the board, and I have been part of that community and have built a community on sustainability, which is interesting because it goes over to my job at the Grow House, which I don't know if you've researched what the Grow House does. They're urban farms indoor, and it's a community hub. We do food distribution, we do farming, we do education. So it's interesting that I live and am part of a community down here, which I've been working for with 8 years, and work in another community that now has become my community because I spent so much time there and I fell in love with the people there. So for me, community means kind of like what you mentioned, just who you're making networking with, how you're involved, whether it's through a passion that you have, a need. I heard her mention the need for that arises, who's around you, who you could refer people to, how much networking we're doing, and we're supporting others to do the same. So yeah, that's what community means to me.
Buenos días. Good morning. My name is Angela Ortiz. I am a multifaceted woman. I do all kinds of stuff. I collaborate with the Grow House, but I'm here today representing a group called Flows, which is Foundation for Leaders Organizing for Water and Sustainability. It is a partnership between Boulder Housing Partners, which is the housing authority here in Boulder, and also CU Boulder and their environmental center. So together we work with low-income residents and underrepresented students of the university, and we work together entering the homes of other low-income residents and talking about sustainability. Definitely something that I saw there is kind of from the asset-minded perspective, thinking that as low-income communities and immigrant communities, we have a lot of knowledge that is untapped and unrecognized by the larger society. So we go into those homes kind of reminding people of that knowledge that we have, and the fact that most of us are immigrants. We come with a sense of, we just are more aware of how we use all resources, including our community. So that's who I'm here representing today, and I'm a mother, a single mother. And my definition of community is pretty much all of the above. My son said that the other day. It's like, no, all of the above. And also, I really think that it's just it's us. It's this space. We're creating community here. I feel like it's just any group of people that is able to exchange resources and exchange knowledge and find effective problem resolution through respect. So, that's short version.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I appreciate all of your responses and both the similarities and the differences of it, because I think that's sort of what makes what makes community is sort of like each of our own perspectives, each of our own sort of connection to each other, and sort of the reasons why we're engaged in the work that we do. And something that the teachers have been working on in this course is thinking about how different things, systems, different sort of happenings influence the life of a child and of their family, right? So something that they might not directly impact them, like not in their daily lives, but what the decisions that happen at city council, sort of the overall like environmental, social, political feel of an era or of a time, right? And how all of that influence the children now and our own lives and how we view community. And so just wanted to give you a little bit more context about some of the thinking that the teachers have been doing, and why we've invited you all to share and to think about sort of thinking about like the individual, but also the individual within the context of the community, and sort of the different roles, the different sort of places and spaces that you all occupy in your work. And so, like you mentioned the assets, and it's important to be focused on the assets. And so I want to hear a little bit more about what you feel, what you all feel the assets of the community, a community, which community. you're working in or you're living in, impacting.
So what's good? What's out there that we as educators could celebrate, leverage, gain energy from that you're seeing?
Okay, maybe I'll just jump in real quick since I brought the word up. I definitely think that one of the biggest assets that we have in our community, and I feel like we all belong to different communities, right? But something that I see for Boulder that sometimes a little bit untapped, like I said before, is just kind of our immigrant and multicultural community. I feel like we are not exchanging enough with some of those members in our community. I feel like we're going to use the word community a lot. So I feel like we're lacking in the way, the knowledge, the just being humble and just being less afraid of what's different. I feel like that is huge. I am super blessed to live in a space, it's a program from Boulder Housing Partners, the housing authority here in Boulder, that is, I think, is the most diverse place in Boulder. So I'm very lucky to be able to live surrounded by people from Japan, Sudan, Nepal, Mexico, from Colombia. So I feel So I feel that that's something that we forget to highlight, to kind of get closer to be curious about, to ask questions, to maybe lower our judgment, or so I feel that will be one of the biggest assets, untapped assets that we have.
So in regards to that and what I heard you ask the class, like this, the Journey School, and everybody here said, white, what does that mean? Why is that? How do the kids that are in this school tap into the community she's talking about and get those assets? That's what I'm curious about. How, as a teacher, can you explore within this Boulder community programs in the Gambio, programs, events that are happening at Housing Partners, at the with Parks and Recreation, with other schools like Head Start, which I think all of you get to, your program gets to be part of Head Start for
There are some of the placements.
Yes.
So this group is they're all in Boulder Journey School.
Okay.
And there's another group of students who can choose, or maybe that's where they were working already and decided to be part of the teacher education program. But there's placements in Boulder, Head Start, as well as in Denver, Clayton, Early Learning, JCC. There's a variety of settings that teachers.
So that's huge. That's huge. You are in a very privileged school. What does that even mean for your training? Is it worth taking switching? I don't know what that would mean, but like doing a trip there, changing with one of the students that's in a Head Start program or in one of the other church programs that is serving a different clientele, so that you could really go deep. One of the things I do at the Grow House when we take interns or when we're hiring, they come with very specific trainings, grad school, and they come out not having the experience to work with an area like 80216 that has a million challenges. And the families are still full of assets, kick-ass people, the willingness, the love, the passion to build community. I have yet seen so much community that I think I thrived at. I miss that sometimes when I come home to Boulder, other than I live in another little community. But when I first got here and my kids went to Whittier, I was like, whoa, what does this mean? How do I fit in here with being Latina, 8 kids, living in a trailer park, being educated, having a lot of privileges myself. My kids have all gone, 3 of them have graduated from the ROPA. Some are in Japan, some are in, my kids have been privileged. But what did it mean for me, looking Hispanic, having 8 kids pulling out the van and a tribe of kids coming out? Wait, who is that? But these are real things that people experience. You look at that and, So what does it mean for you as educators? What's the opportunity to look at community organizations that could get to even the children that are coming here to have a day of service together? Something that will open the eyes to the experience of a different culture, a different economic culture, you know? So those are things that interest me the minute I walked in here and saw what the kids here are experiencing versus some young pre-kids or preschool age kids that will never have this experience, just walking in the door, seeing the one beautiful goldfish sticking out saying hi to me. You know, what does that do? And this is what you're learning about, and I think it's so good that we're all here in different organizations to open and maybe help you decide on a project.
So ditto, and but I do think that you know, in working with kids and trying to talk about racial justice and economic justice, environmental justice, all of those issues, before you start diving into trying to remedy those situations, I think it's important to lay a foundation about why the situation is the way it is. Because until you do that, you really don't, it's hard to look at assets. And there's a lot of historical reasons why people of color, you know, somebody came up to council the other day and said something about, well, you know, if we don't do something about fracking, you know, they're going to go frack over in the Latino neighborhoods. It's like, well, it's not necessarily the Latino neighborhoods, but it's the poor neighborhoods, but Latinos are disproportionately represented in the poor neighborhoods. So what happens then is people associate Latino means poor. And that's like not the case. You know, and the same goes for Black means poor. But it's all of the historical reasons that, you know, come from way back the creation of our country, that set the foundation for discriminatory practices. And, you know, in respect to, you know, asset-based, I think the question that is always good to ask ourselves when you embark on some sort of a community project is to ask yourself, who benefits? Who benefits? Are you doing this for the benefit of the community? Or are you doing this for the benefit of yourself? And the best outcome is to do it for the benefit of both, ideally. But if there's to be an imbalance, to have it be for the benefit of the community. You know, and one of the biggest areas that I've seen in places where there's this idea of wanting to help communities. And I think that's where you need to say is, what can we learn from other communities? Because when you look at lower income communities, the zip code that you were talking about, there is so much resilience within communities that lack resources, because you have to make do. You have to get really creative about how you fix things. You can't just go out and buy a replacement car. You have to figure out how you replace that part, or you just keep working with what you have because you don't have the resources. So those are the kinds of things that I think that you learn. That means asset-based to me is the resilience that communities have because, you know, of the resources that they have or don't have to work with. I also think that some communities, because of those lacks of resources, are more communal. They do work a lot more together, and folks have a lot of resources. You can just go out and call an Uber and get your transportation to go somewhere, as opposed to, who can I call to help me, you know, to take me where I need to go? Oh, I know that my neighbor over here has to go to this place every day, so maybe she can drop me off on the way. And so it's more of a communal thinking because of the resources that you do or don't have to work with. And one of the reasons I was concerned about, it's like you have a week to create community engagement. It's like, that's impossible.
Years.
It takes years. I mean, you know, relationships and genuine, authentic relationships take years. And you start by like kind of inching in. It's not like you don't parachute in and helicopter out. And that's, I think, the important thing is what you start has to have value long after you've left. It's not something that just is cut off once you're gone. And I think that's an important way to approach it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that word was quite new for me. I have to ask my God, what does it mean? So, if it's okay for you, I want to have more time for things.
Yeah.
But in general, I'm very agree with what they say. So I think it's applicable to me. I feel very identified with all their works. Yeah.
Si quieres hablar español, pues.
Sí,
O
sí.
sea,
Todos entonces.
Okay. No sabía que había entonces.
So that's an interesting observation. The table is all Latina women. And is there any other Latina women? 1, 2, in the 3 in the field there?
Or people who identify as color.
Yeah, and then we intentionally wanted to bring diverse voices. It just so happened that all of the ones that could make it in the morning session were all these fantastic Latinos. So I'm so excited about that.
In this specific moment in Boulder or Denver, wherever your community might be, what do you see as the biggest threats to that community? What do you see as the biggest unanswered questions that we, as a greater whole, need to grapple with?
So for me, what I hear is immigration is a huge topic right now. I think healthcare or access to healthcare is another. And I think one other one that I hear, and we're at the Grow House, we're trying to talk about and sit together, is preschool education, access to affordable, good, not just, education, but really good, intentional, detailed, creative, that we could be bringing the whole child that when they go into kindergarten, they are not left behind or starting way behind. And that's something that I'm passionate about, because I've had the privilege, I have 8 children, and I've had the privilege of having them in New York in really good schools and seeing the difference of my friends' kids that went maybe to not as good school and me commuting an hour a day to get them to a good school and really being intentional about their education, because it's always been a huge priority for me. I see the difference. And it's not necessarily money as an asset, it's the ability to have the expression to create, the wellness in your body, that you have these skills to meditate or travel or experience things. That's all assets and privileges that we're not just talking about money. Like, I think money is very important, but a lot of us get caught on the economic standard that you're living. But I think that a lot of the children of color don't get those experiences. They get placed in a school, that school, because of its zip code and its parents' involvement with the PTA or voice, they get left behind, so that's important to me.
I think, well, I think that, as you say, I'm worried about also the health that the children can even if we live in very, very good community, I come from Spain and I always surprised about how many resources we have here in Boulder. But I don't think it's the same in Denver. I think it's like a frontera between Denver and Boulder. In Boulder, we have a lot of resources. But I think I visit every day many students. In Japan, we have a lot of home students. They somewhat have good access to health. But for example, someone they don't have access to a good childcare, affordable childcare. I visit sometimes houses where they have many children in one house, and only one person in charge them, and they only watching TV. So I think it would be so important that exist more places like Star. That they are, I think it's showing off. So one of my concerns is that. So also the special attention for I saw children that they have problems to speak. So they are not at the same, they speak like baby when they have 5-6 years old. So I think to have more resources like that, for example, I think it would be very important. Immigration, I'm seeing every day children very scary that their parents can be deported. So this is something that's worrying me a lot because this is like these children going to grow with this a lot of miedos, fears, a lot of fears. This can change your life completely. This is going to be a damage in all your body and the way that you project yourself in the community. So I think we have to work a lot around all that because I think it's the most weak part of our community. And if we want to have a healthy community, we have to take care of that part of the community. So.
Yeah, I wonder if you all have sort of referenced how sort of specific moments in time have impacted your experience as you shared in your autobiographical mapping project and thinking about like the impact that 9/11 or sort of other where you can easily sort of think before and after like how was life different and I often think about like our current presidency and the current sort of environment around immigration and like the fear, like literally the fear in children that who are experiencing this on a daily basis and how that is impacting their thinking, their view, their perspective on the world around them. So I just wanted to make that connection.
It's true, and I see that in my daughter's school, it's not a lot of diversity. And I always try to her to talk about the rest, that she be aware of what's going on in this, in this time of our life. So I think it's very important also to make all the children or another part, the strong part of our community more aware to that things and be solidarious.
Yeah, and solidarity.
Yeah.
I have a question, because being that this school is here and might not be facing the same challenges that other kids in other schools might be having, something like with the flood, even this building, I think got probably impacted because, that was only a few years ago, but it was devastating. A lot of different homes, there was no social anything there. It just came through and a lot of homes were damaged and probably kids in this school have experienced that. That might be something. I've seen in Lyons now, they've rebuilt a park that's amazingly beautiful. What does that mean? Children and disaster. How does that impact the fear of when they see rain? Is it going to flood again? Because I know I feel it a little.
Yeah, every time you get a big storm like this.
Yes.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, what are issues facing our community, or you can see them as needs or threats that we should really care about, or that seem especially salient right now?
Yeah. Well, as a council member, I think that there is the whole process of gentrification and taking whatever, we have this land issue in Boulder because we have the open space around us and we only have so much land. So a lot of what we can do to build more housing, because we do have a housing shortage, is redevelopment. And so what's happening is there's these pockets of land that you can redevelop, and it displaces people. It displaces not just people living there, but small businesses. I'll give you an example. Lately, we've been getting a lot of email from, there's going to be a hotel that's going to go up on the hill to provide economic vitality to the hill, because some businesses say that they can't stay in business year-round because they need a more diverse set of traffic, and other businesses say we're fine the way this is. And one thing for sure is this hotel is going to displace small businesses. Boba's market, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Boba's. Boba's market, there's the displacement of Doozy Duds, a place to do your laundry, which I think is critical to a community. If that's not there, where are people going to have to go to do their laundry? And that's something that I see closing in this community, is those basic amenities that, everyone assumes that everyone can have a washer and dryer, but that's not necessarily true. So I think that one of the biggest impacts in our community right now is, as we see redevelopment, is making sure that we address the displacement. And we're also seeing a lot of email about people whose rents are going way up. Even in affordable housing, their rents are going way up. And that's because, the way that affordable housing rents are set are based on the area median income, on the percentage of the area median income. And so when that area median income goes up, so does that percentage. So it's like you can't win. But I see those as the biggest impacts. And just, to echo what you guys were saying is the fear that's out there from mixed status families, that makes them really ripe for abuse. And I'm seeing that in the community right now, where people have been abused in many ways because they were afraid to speak up. And if you're not on the lookout for that stuff, you think everything's hunky-dory in Boulder, everybody's wealthy and things are really cool. It's not. You have to scratch underneath the surface, and the issues are there.
I would like to echo the whole housing issue. I think it's one of the biggest ones. I am one low-income resident of Boulder, so I am really lucky to be in a 5-year program right now, but I'm approaching the end of the program, and I am really nervous about where I'm going to take my son after that. So housing is huge, and I feel housing impacts the children in the house, because the parents are worried, the kids are worried, they don't know why they're worried, but the vibe is there. I grew up that way. I grew up with my parents never knowing where next month the rent is going to come from. And I remember as a child having to grow up a lot faster, just kind of strengthen that side inside of me, because I have a little sister and I felt like I had to tell her that everything was going to be okay when I was 6, 7 years old. So if which probably maybe that's not something that your children are experiencing much here, but I feel then another issue that I would like to highlight is the fact that many of us in situations of privilege tend to kind of have a blind eye to those issues. And if you're surrounded or you're members of communities that have a lot of privilege, how are you encouraging the dismantling of some of that thinking? Even if you're not constantly surrounded by culture and language and diversity, how are you actively being part of the dismantling of those structures, independently of where you are? And yourself, your children, the children impacting the parents impacting the workplaces. all that stuff. And if we all keep kind of like the little blinders, and we don't break those cycles and those structures that are invisible but are like humongous and divide us, then I feel like we're gonna get nowhere. So
can I just give an example of, what you're talking about, these blind sides and the biases. There was an issue that came to council recently where there was a lot of redevelopment going on in East Pearl, and it was housing, very expensive housing, but there was no retail that was happening on the ground floor. So we passed something that said that we must require the retail on the ground floor, and I was of mixed minds on that, because you pass retail, put retail on the ground floor, well, who's gonna work there? And where are they gonna live? And so, the whole idea was, well, we need walkable neighborhoods, but my question was, well, who's it walkable for? And you have to think about the people that are gonna work there. And if you're not gonna have parking, it's like you say, well, you don't need parking because it's gonna be walkable. Well, that's not entirely true, because somebody's gotta work those low-wage jobs, and that, for a cool restaurant that closes at 2 a.m., there's no public transit. And so they're gonna be forced to drive, and so where do they park? Anyway, I could go on and on with examples like that happen in the city where the blinders are there, and it just, yeah.
And one thing with housing, like I just heard you mention, we do have a crisis here in Boulder. And you mentioned that there's a lot of services here in Boulder. I also feel that compared to Denver, where there's so many people needing, so the wait lists are 3 and 4 years. Where does a family go when you have 2 or 3 kids? I hear of a lot of people sleeping in the cars now. Where in Boulder, you're right, there's still a need, a great need, but it's so much less than in Denver, so people could get into a program. I know right now of like a few apartments that have been empty for a few months, and even in your community. Yeah, and I'm like, wow, this apartment is empty since February. Is there not a family in need that needs to get in that space? In Denver, that space would have been taken the next day because the list is so long of people needing housing and issues. So it's interesting that housing affects everything, the wellness. I mean, I work with families, I work with teens that are sleeping. I used to get to work really early in the morning, and right behind our garbage cans, we had created a fence, and I started getting there a little earlier before we even opened, and there were teens sleeping behind the garbage with their puppy, and I used to come in and make tea for them, and they were living by the Carina factory, under 70, and they huddled together. Sometimes you would see 7.
They created community.
They created community. 7 and 8 young teens living in the street, but had that resource of community. Yeah.
I want to explore this idea of displacement. So gentrification forces lower socioeconomic folks from lower socioeconomic levels out, right? So clearly the impact on them leaving is huge. But how does forcing people out of a community or having unjust practices, how does that influence those of us who might stay in a community? Maybe we don't see it, but we lose the people, we lose a certain subset of our community. What is the long-term impact of that, of forcing people out?
I just want to say, in Colombia we have a saying, well, I think it's in Spanish, but ojos que no ven, corazón que no siente. Eyes that don't see, heart that doesn't feel. So if you don't see poverty, if you don't see diversity, if you don't see culture, if you don't see language, then it stops existing and it perpetuates the system that we already have. So then you lose the opportunity to learn, you lose the opportunity to face the issues and make a change. That would be my issue.
That's a good answer.
No, but it's true. It's to be more engaged with this kind of organization and do a lot of work and be more close to the people that have the really needs. So, like for example, EFA, how many people they serve. So if you don't go there, for example, as a volunteer, where you maybe don't know how many people need food in this community, how many people know even fresh food. It's so difficult to have affordable, good food, fresh food, I don't know, organic things. So if you don't go there, if you don't in touch with them, you don't know that. And many organizations and systems is, for me, was the same. I was new in this community, and I started as a volunteer because I can work in the beginning, and I started to be a volunteer in sister camp. For me, it was, oh my God, this is amazing, and they serve a big community.
There's a
People
stigma.
that they don't, exactly, people they don't have even hampers for the children. So if I not be part of that time, that be volunteer in that time, maybe I don't know that this community have this kind of issues. So I think how she say, ojos que no ven, corazón que no siente. You have to be more close to that person or that organization that helps.
So I related to teaching is like a field trip. They have a beautiful farm in Lafayette where they grow all their food for the food pantry. Like how wonderful if it could be a field trip for these kids to go and work in the farm and be able to even go and help pack or do something that they get to witness that, you know, garden to table and not in a fancy hipster way, but in a reality way of a need that is being addressed, that there's a huge shortage. Because like in Denver, it used to be that our area was considered a food desert. I live in Boulder. I live like around the corner from Whole Foods. And I laugh, I teach my people when I'm teaching them about growing, because I have an amazing small site, but I grow a lot of food, and I teach them, I say, you know, I laugh when I pass by Whole Foods. You know, they have great food, but I have great food in my yard. And then I empower them that it's a choice for me, you know, to grow food. When I'm not in a big food desert, I could go right to Whole Foods or to Vitamin Cottage or to Sprouts. I'm right around in that center, but I choose not to because I want it right in my garden. I want to teach my kids that even though I might be able to go by in those stores, I'm choosing not to because I want them to be aware of where their food comes from, making healthy choices and moving, and all the different things that I want to empower my kids to. So I see this in this area for this school, that might be a good connection. And I think you were saying you were making one with one of the farms, and that's great.
Well, you can walk 5 blocks up to Effa. That's
another
that's
right here.
really, really close, yeah. And you know, I
Do you mind, does everyone know what, we do that, we just had that drawing, and certain classrooms, the children want to take donations and walk with their children.
yeah,
So that's one of the connections.
yeah, just walk up there. There's a real stigma, you know, with being poor. I mean, it's not something that you want to admit, but you can, you know, I have a lot of privilege, but I'm not a wealthy person for sure. I can't afford to go to Europe every summer. Like a lot of families, they go to Europe for spring break. And so to be in a conversation where everybody's talking about the European vacation they took kind of makes you feel like an out, you know, not in the group. And so I think that the stigma of not being able to afford the European vacation is like a pretty kind of a poor example, right? But I think that there's stigma in poverty, and people can't admit that, well, I actually didn't go to Europe this summer because I can't afford it. Don't say that in that group because of the stigma. And so that's, you know, that's another thing. It's like, it's really hard, I think, to bring people together of different socioeconomic levels to talk, because sometimes I was in a conversation one time with a group of women, and there was this one woman who was had been invited to this group, who was a janitor at one of the rec centers, and I was more kind of observing because I wasn't relating to the other group, but they were talking about, you know, how much they pay for healthcare and what this healthcare is here, and you know what their insurance payments are and where they go and what their deductibles are, and you know, I use Obamacare, And this other woman says, well, you know, I can't get dental care because it's not covered by Medicaid. And it's just that, it was just like silence, you know, and there's such a chasm in how you can relate to one another. I think one of the ways you bridge it is through food and just break bread, you know. But anyway, I don't know how I got on a tangent.
No, I think, Mary, I think you kind of leads into the question I was thinking about anyways is, right, so we've talked about sort of what's good and what are the assets, like what is working for community and with community. We've talked about what are some of the challenges that different communities are facing. I'm wondering, like, how do we move forward? What's the next step? How, like, what makes, where's the hope, right? Where's the momentum? Where's the energy to keep doing what we're doing, and for us as educators to continue doing the work that we're doing, like with that lens of, you know, of making sure that we're thinking about communities when we're thinking about, you know, working with our students. Like, what keeps you going?
So one thing you mentioned, like for me, I think of like one silly example, but it gave me a lot of hope. When I moved to Boulder 8 years ago, I came off living on a farm, and I needed chickens. I didn't know how to teach my kids about sex, anything, without having some kind of animal, having some interaction that they would see it and the conversation would start. And I was like, I need chickens. I've never had, it's been 30 years I lived without chickens, but in my community, no one had chickens. And when I came and started talking about me getting chickens, everybody thought, oh my God, she's gonna get roosters and they're gonna fight. Thinking that I'm like, you know, why is she wanting chickens in the city? There's food around. But the transition I saw the community from just being very intentional and gentle, not coming in like, I want chickens and I'm gonna get chickens. I took the time to see everybody. I brought cooperative extension in to talk about chickens, that it didn't devalue the property. I went to, Boulder didn't have any rules too much. They said you can have chickens. I went to Lafayette that had a program in place that I had 14 at the time. I had to get rid of 7. They only owned maybe 6. They allowed 8 chickens. So I went to that method. I said, I'll give mine up because I want a program that really is existing, that I could show statistics that it's succeeding. And we did like this whole thing of, it had to go through a program and it had to get approved. All your neighbors had to sign that they allowed it. Like I got very detailed. When you build the coop, was it safe for the chickens? Was it neat? Was it gonna smell? I got very strong with it. So when it was time to vote, I kept hearing mixed things like, no, the value. But because I just took so much time and I wasn't just thinking of me, I was thinking like what you said earlier, is it for the community? Is it going to serve? Even though I'm very passionate about them, I kept thinking, it's going to serve by having eggs. It's going to help by having manure so that they could spread around the vegetables that I kept helping to build community gardens in our area, in my little community. And I said, this is not just about me teaching my kids about sex. This is really a need here for the community. You know, you go to the farmer's market, a dozen is $8 for eggs, you know. And then I started sharing my eggs, and people started tasting them and saying, oh, and then seniors were bringing their grandkids when they were watching them by my house to see the community, the chickens. And so everybody was like, Isabel, you have your chickens right on the front part. I was like, I'm intentional about where I place them, so that it wasn't just me enjoying the chickens, other neighbors were enjoying the chickens. So I find that what you're talking with this question is that anything that we do, any change that we're gonna bring, it should be for the community, like you mentioned earlier, not just for yourself. And taking the time to really be slow, trying to answer the questions for people that might not feel positive about a project that the kids are taking on or something, or even families. Like I'm sure there's parents here that, no, I don't want my kid going to a farm. I don't want my kids going to a farm working with homeless people and seeing and being in a close association. That exists. I've seen it here in Boulder. You know, I've seen it everywhere, not just here in Boulder. So how do we take these steps so that we could convince the parents of projects that use it to take it on? You know, I happened to come a little early and I heard one of the comments of how some of the teachers are feeling with the families, and I was very interested in that. Like I heard one person say, you have to have that division of a teacher and a child. You know, my challenge to you is, do we have to have that? I've seen my kids grow when a teacher was really committed to a teacher that just gave a limit or maybe the boundary of what they would do and knew that it was a challenge and didn't approach them. My son just graduated last night from Casey. He had amazing teachers that this year he took like a little 3-month break from work because he felt like he's in 8th grade, he's graduating. Each and every teacher contacted me and worked with me. And I was getting daily emails like, Isabel, he did it, I'm so happy. And I would check in with them. If I didn't have that, if he would have slipped through the cracks, would he have graduated yesterday? So the teacher's involvement in a kid's life, I find to be enormous. And don't be afraid to take that leap in to even get closer to a child and its family is my experience in even working in the grow house with the families.
I think it's an opportunity as educators to build community with the kids and long-term relationships that happen. One of my sisters is she was a first grade teacher for many years. And she's Facebook friends with people that she taught 25 years ago. And they're like, you know, so, and she sees them and she, you know, so she has maintained the relationship. And I agree, don't be afraid to feel like you have to maintain boundaries because it's when you let go of those boundaries that things happen.
I have to say that
Educators.
As an educator, I encourage you all to be more curious, to be really go more deep and try to pass the barriers and go further. And in yourself, always challenge yourself, always. I know that at the moment you have a lot of challenges here in this community, but it's also a good moment. It's a moment that you can use for challenge yourself. And I know that maybe before with our conversation looked like it's so many things to do in this community, but this is an amazing community. And I can say that because I born in Cuba, I grew up in Spain, so I have the experience for completely different systems. And I think it's a lot of things to do, but also it's a lot of people working with the same goal. And it's a lot of people that are really care about what's going on. So I think example before to bring the baby children to grow up garden. This is amazing. My daughter is part of the Sister Carmen, and she enjoyed to be full of earth, and she gets so happy with the bucket full of carrot and a lot of vegetable she brings to her teacher in the school. So I think this is made them be more engaged to work with our community, with in general everybody. So I think my advice is to be curious, go forward, don't break barriers.
One of my main motivators is I do believe that we are meant to improve the spaces where we are and leave them better than when we first arrived, right? I feel that strongly. I feel it doesn't matter how long we're here to stay, like just come, put it all, and then leave it for somebody else to enjoy it, even if it's not going to be you directly benefiting from it. I also feel like something that I have to remind myself is that we are all cyclical, and my cycles are very obvious. So either I'm like, yes, we can do it, or I'm like, oh my god, we're gonna die. You know, like, so kind of embracing that, I think is very important too. I feel part of my motivation is understanding that I'm cyclical. And that's part of the beauty, and that's in those falls is where I get momentum to go right back. So I feel that's a big motivator. I feel as educators, and I'm not a teacher, but I'm a teacher. So I feel like what you said, I feel we have so much power when we have people looking at us, when we have children listening and observing our actions. And it's very important for us to understand that we live in a very individualistic society where we just recognize success, like just kind of like, oh, you know, preschool, you graduate from preschool, yeah, you graduate from middle school, yeah, you like, there's like all this emphasis on success and crossing that line and not on the journey to get somewhere, right? And as a beauty, I feel like I'm proud about that because, you know, if Latinos and other immigrants have more of that collectiveness because maybe the lack of resources at a global scale. But I feel like as teachers, we have the opportunity to break those things in children without really even having to say anything, you know, with our actions, with our intention, with our meaning, the meaning that we put behind what we do. So I try to remind myself of that and enjoy the fall.
So wait, yeah, you asked, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I just wanted to, the question is what keeps you going? And so just one thing is justice. And a while ago, this was several years ago, I read The Prince by Machiavelli. And that book stunned me because it was like, oh my God, you can use power for good, not just evil. And so it's like, take the power that you have. You know, I have 1/9 of a city council because there's 9 of us. But you can take that power, whatever it is, your power as an educator, your power as a community member, you have power, and take that power and use it for good.
Oh, yeah, so soy cubana, yo también.
I'm sorry?
Soy cubana también.
Oh,
Ella
okay.
también.
Yo también. Were you in a group? Did you? Cuban.
Oh, yeah.
But I was going to say, what you were saying reminded me that part of our responsibility as educators, I feel, since being here, is to be advocates for the place that we work and bettering the environment. And it's so easy in the program that we're in to think of it as just 1 year and then someone's going to replace us. Most of us are only here and we leave. But that's not the role of an educator. We're supposed to be able to make an impact, and so it's easy to get discouraged in an environment where you're only here for a year and you're going to leave this place and think, well, what kind of legacy am I supposed to leave if I'm only here for such a short time? But I think that we all, just being candid, I think that we know that BJS does a lot of good, Boulder Junior School does a lot of good, but it can do better, especially in regards to serving the surrounding community around us. I think that we have the opportunity to offer scholarships to the surrounding community and in providing inclusive classrooms to children with special needs. We have a school that can provide that, but for some reason, and it causes me dissonance because I think that we can provide education for children that really deserve it and need it just as much as the children that are already here. So that's just a candid opinion, but yeah.
It's huge, exactly. Yeah. I think of 2 things when you're saying that. A year in a kid's life at the age you're serving is huge. That impact alone is going to leave a memory if you're doing it right and you're building those relationships with your class. That's one thing I thought of. And the other thing that popped in as we're talking, and I always get at the crossroads with this, is that you are working here. Yes, it might be privileged. Yes, it might be all of the above that we've been talking about. But with the kids that are here, they're human, they're facing challenges, there's bullying, there's abuse at home, there's alcoholism, there's all kinds of challenges that we might not be seeing. And that's the interesting point that, I almost felt that for a minute and I had to catch myself as I'm listening. I walked in and I was like, and I think of like where we're working and how thrilled my kids are to just be in the backyard with the smell of pollution all around. But these little children are going probably maybe not those challenges, but they're living daily challenges themselves. And so I want to bring back that to separate everything so much scares me. I feel like I'm being part of the system of separating and saying, oh, our Latinos families are this, how, you know. So I want to bring it back with the kids here that we're serving.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Mary? Yeah, I just wanted to ask, you talked about using your power for good and justice, and I was wondering what your personal definition of justice is. Can you speak to that?
That's a really good question. My personal definition of justice is making sure that it has a lot to do with money, I think, for me, because a lot of times where justice can intercede is where greed is. And I think that that's an important piece of it, is, you know, where greed starts to grow, I think there are opportunities for justice. I think if I have to define it, I think that. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Let's press pause. Let's take about a 10-minute break. But we're not stopping the conversation. We're going to engage in the conversation in a different way when we come back. So during your break, do whatever you need to do, but also think about some of the things that have come up that you would like to know more about. Same with you. What would you like to converse with in small groups with some of our teachers? Just kind of think a little bit, but we'll come back in 10 minutes. We'll divide up into groups and kind of cycle through everybody on the panel. Cool, thanks. So 10-10 would be 10 minutes.
Quiero hablar contigo, pero ya.